Hello, gentlemen, barbarian savages. Rooster here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about GynoPlanet, and we're over here talking about after the police state, what happens? You got revolt, revolution, world war, world crisis, right? Well, as I've said before, this entire side of the GynoPlanet cycle is survival of the richest. Now, when you move over to this side and you start working your way back up, that's survival of the fittest. And that's a whole different story. And it's kind of when gynocentrism goes out the door. Um, so let's talk about revolt, revolution, world war, world crisis. The police state's up. They're pushing people as far as they can, basically. Everybody's a wage slave. You don't have any control over your life. And revolt breaks out. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is we've been very, very, very close to this recently. Occupy Wall Street really had people scared. We had the the Arabic Spring over there in Libya and Egypt, and that was very close as well. And you had some regime change over there. What a lot of people don't understand, though, is these are considered revolts now. 500 years ago, those would be revolutions. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution with the Bolsheviks and stuff like that. Those were revolutions back then because those were empires. But the empires that we have now are global. So it's more like a state or a city uprising, or even, from 500 years ago, is like an entire country uprising now. In order for us to get to a point where we have a revolution now, it would have to be a global revolution. That's how much whack-a-mole control the UN and these governments have over the entire planet at this point. One country rising up, Egypt rising up and having a revolt, isn't going to change that much stuff. The police state will still stay intact and things will continue. You heard the old Who song, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? That's how it is. Egypt changes leaders. Okay. The UN comes in, talks to them. This is what we do. Puppet strings are set. Da 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 da. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Nothing's going to change. So the only thing that's really going to change once the police state takes hold, even though it pretty much is right now, is a global revolution. And that's a lot of people. And that's basically everyone in the world that's in the 99% rising up against the elitists. And the pure logistics of that happening is very, very small. I mean, it's very, very small. So a lot of things can happen, though, that can kick this off. You could have a global pandemic that kills 95% of the people on the planet. That would do it. Like The Stand, Stephen King wrote a book called The Stand about that, right? You could have World War III. Einstein is famous for saying that he didn't know what weapons they would use for World War III, but he was pretty damn sure that World War IV was going to be fought with sticks and stones because we would bomb ourselves back to the Stone Age. That could happen. I see those two big things. We could go the way of the dinosaurs. We could get hit by an asteroid. We could have a solar flare take out half of the planet. Take out all of our electric grid and everything like that. That would do it. I know a lot of people on this channel aren't global warming fans, but I've read it. I've seen the facts, and global warming is something that could do it. It could kill off a lot of the population. I mean, we could burn ourselves, to death. So there's different ways that this can happen. And I know that you guys are all excited about this, and you want barbarians and savages and axe throwing freaking ninjas jumping over the walls, taking out the governments and all this stuff. And I hated to trick fuck you on this, but classically, the reason that empires fall and the reason that revolutions take place and the reason that revolts take place doesn't have anything to do with barbarians and savages at the gate. It has to do with this right here. Dinaro, dollars, euros, pesos, drachmas, dinares. This right here is the cause of more empires in our history to fall than any kind of warring factions. So this is what I'm going to talk about for the next 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to make this a short one. About the parallels of what we have going on now and the parallels of the 5 or 6 ancient empires that fell because of this right here. Right? So you got Han China. You got the Barbarians of India. You got the Persian Parthians, right? And you have the Roman Empire, the most famous empire of all, right? Why did they all fall? Everybody says, oh, the barbarians, and they came down. When Rome finally fell, it was 2 barbarian kings that walked through downtown Rome into the palace and shook hands with the Roman Empire. That was it. It wasn't some big, huge bloodbath or anything like that. It was 2 guys walking right down the middle of Rome, Italy, right into the palace. Okay? Because Rome fell because of this. But let's talk about some of the parallels that we have between now and then, and how gynocentric thinking, gynocentric decision making, and women and children first had produced the fall of all of these empires. Okay? First thing, political correctness. Okay? Political correctness back in the Roman times was something that came about. The elite ladies and gentlemen of the court and of the Senate could not be bothered with the rabble and didn't want to hear the truth. They excluded themselves from the truth. They only wanted to hear the good things in politically correctness, manners, okay? The problem with political correctness is when a problem arises, obvious solutions cannot be spoken about to power. Anything that's going to curb state power is rejected as incorrect or not politically correct. You can't say that. And I'm going to give you an example of how that's going on right now. We have Muslims bombing all over the planet, blowing stuff up, and the obvious solution is ban Muslims from your country. Donald Trump has said as much as this. It's an obvious solution. It is also very, very politically incorrect. But it is a solution. Okay? Parallels. Second thing, tribal ethnicities. What Rome did is they kept conquering more and more and more and more away from Italy. Turkey, Germany, Belgium, Scotland, England, Persia, all the way to Iraq, okay? All of these people have different ethnicities, right? But they brought them all under the Roman rule, Okay, they even made some of them soldiers. They made, they would take them and bring them into the Roman. We do the same thing in America. The big melting pot, right? We bring these people in. We bring the Mexicans in. We bring Canadians in. We bring Haitians over. We bring Syrians. We bring Japanese. We bring Chinese. We bring them over, right? That's great as long as there's money. As long as the money's flowing, the mercenaries are happy. All of these tribal and ethnicities are. But when you hit resource scarceness, the loyalty of the old sects come out. Okay? There is no American identity. There was no purely Roman identity, even though they really tried to do it. Now, here's the other thing about letting other people into your country, right? And that is they want to get in to get the better life. The Goths for the Roman Empire. They wanted to join the Roman Empire. They didn't want to battle, right? They were already fighting the Germanic tribes on one side. They wanted to be able to go into the Roman Empire to hide. They wanted to become part of it, and the Romans wouldn't let them, right? That's just like the Mexicans. They're just trying to get here to get a better life, but they don't assimilate. And that is the huge problem that we have in the United States. And I know that this is racist and this isn't politically correct and all the stuff that I'm saying isn't what you want to hear. The problem is it's true. Okay? When people from other countries come to a country and they want the money that that country has, but they don't take on the values that created that money in the first place, that's where you have a problem. Mexicans come in here, they want to have their own language, they want to have their own this and that, they want to have their Cinco de Mayo, they want to have their own little culture and all of that stuff. Well, that already exists. It's all that stuff that you want is in a place called Mexico. So go back to Mexico. The values of the United States and capitalism and Christianity and the white man and blah, 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 and all that stuff, the racist stuff that I just said, and sexist stuff that I've said many, many times, that's here in America. That's American identity. And when Muslims come over here, they come into the United States and they don't assimilate. They want the money that the culture brings, and I'm going to say it again, but they don't want to take on the values that got the money here in the first place. And what happens is you have little Syria, little Iraq, little Mexico, little China, and it's not a melting pot. It creates factions, and it reduces the American culture. And you don't see it when times are good, but when times are bad, you're going to have fracturing and factioning, right? Okay. Political correctness, tribal ethnicities. The third thing that you're going to see is disposability of men. Rome was at war the whole time for basically 5 centuries, 500 years of its empire. And men were disposable through war, through disease, through infection. And what happens when men become disposable? And it's happening in our society right now, where men are disposable. That's the big Mgtow movement that we have right now, is because fathers have become disposable. Well, it leaves widows and orphans. Or in our society, it leaves single moms and little boys that are raised in single parent households, or what I call no parent households, because mama's off at work. Okay, she's a latchkey kid raising themselves, and they don't learn any moral values or cultural values or social values, and it creates a decay, generation after generation of decay. But that all stems from what? The disposability of men. Disposability of men comes from gynocentrism. Gynocentrism is the cause of all of this stuff. Okay, the fourth thing that you see a parallel between the United States right now and Rome is the immigration of the poor to the cities and the migration of the rich away from the cities. Now, why? These people are immigrating to the cities because they want to be taken care of. They want their water, they want their electricity, they want the city to take care of them for a small fee, right? What Rome did is they provided citizenships to these other countries that they conquered to get taxes and to get workers. At the peak of the Roman Empire, there were 1 million people in Rome, right? But there was 1/10 the population on the planet Earth. It was a huge, huge city, and they needed workers. And it created wage slavery, which is the same thing that we have now. But now the rich, on the other hand, they flee the cities. Why? Because when you live out in the country, it's harder to find you for the tax man to hunt you down and make you pay taxes to the Roman Empire, right? And it also creates a situation where when you have Goths and German barbarians and Turkish fur traders and everything coming to Rome, just like we have here, we have Mexicans and Haitians coming over, we have Chinese and Japanese coming over and taking our jobs. The local people can't compete with the slaves, okay? And the local people that are citizens have to pay taxes and slaves don't, right? So what happens? What happened in Rome? The elite bought up slaves and farms, okay? The blue-collar people moved to the city to get free bread and circuses. That was the big giveaway. That was the welfare state back in Roman times, okay? You got the gladiatorial battles, and if you lived and you were a citizen and you lived inside of Rome, you got free bread. You got free food. That's a welfare state. Food stamps. Same thing nowadays. Everybody goes to the city to get their food stamps. People that are Mgtow move away from the city. They get out into the country. They get solar panels. They get all of the stuff that I told you to do in the Black Belt videos. Okay? Get out of the cities. Okay? Sixth thing. Force of arms. The Roman Empire is famous for force of arms. They conquered every single country out there around them. And, you know, the United States does the same thing. Vietnam, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. If you see resources that we need, we go into the country, we use force of arms. We use false flags. We use whatever we can to get our army into the country, and then we take it over for the resources. Okay? And the army, once it's in there, you know, the Roman army did infrastructure. They built roads from one end of the country to the other end of the country so that they could go and then conquer the next country outside of that country. They would build a road right across the country so they could take the wagons and the chariots across that country that they just conquered to get to the next country to conquer that one. Okay? So that's the same thing as infrastructure. We go in, we're going to rebuild Iraq. We're going to do regime change in Iraq. No, we're there for fucking oil. Okay? We want your oil. We're going to build roads, enough roads to get to your oil fields so that our trucks can get back and forth and fill up. Okay? So the army used to control movement or to build our infrastructure. That's a key. Same thing. Parallels Rome. Rome fell, and our empire is going to fall too. Okay? Conversion from a republic to an empire by Augustus Caesar. I think it happened 34 AD, something like that. That hasn't happened here yet, but it's getting pretty close. The fascism levels are pretty high. It may not actually be a ceremony where the president comes out and says, we are no longer a republic. I am now the king of the United States, and it is now an empire. But with executive orders and the ability to use executive orders now by the president, it's almost already there. I mean, you can almost say it's there. The president can now make laws with executive orders that takes him 5 minutes to write out, hands it out, sends it to Congress, and that becomes a law. Okay? No billing, no nothing. No voting, no nothing. Okay? I already talked about the Goths. When administrations become based on geography or geographical region and not tribal, okay? Human beings are tribal by nature. Those tribes grow to the size that they can. They take over that area where the tribe is around the city or whatever, and that is their area. If it's as big as Iraq, if it's as big as whatever, if that tribe is that big, then that area becomes that big. When you start slicing up based on this river goes through here, and this we're going to make a line here, and it cuts a tribal area in half, or cuts a piece of the tribal area off, that's when you have problems. Joe Biden in 2000, before we went into Iraq, said, this is what we need to do to Iraq. We need to cut off the Shiite part, the Kurdish part, and the Sunni part. And we need to make 3 Iraqs that are tribal regions. They run themselves. And we will have no fucking problems. That's what they did in Bosnia-Herzegovina. They took the Muslims and the Christians and the Gypsies, and they made 3 countries, right? And it worked. Okay, now you got the Czech Republic and some other stuff in there, right? We didn't do that in Iraq. Said, no, we're going to keep all of Iraq together. We're going to make lines on the graph, and if this cuts through Sunni tribal areas, too bad. If this cuts through Shiite tribal areas, too bad. If this cuts through Kurdish tribal areas, too bad. Well, they cut the Kurdish area right in half, so half of Kurdistan is in Turkey and half of it's in Iraq. Okay, half of the Shiite area is in Syria, half of it's in Iraq, and the Sunni area, half of it's in Iran and half of it's in Iraq. Okay, this is why we have all the problems. When a Sunni's in charge, he cleans out the Senate and puts Sunnis all in the Senate. And then when a Shiite gets voted in, a Shiite comes in and he cleans out the Senate and puts all Shiites in it, and it forces opposition down on the other groups. And that's why you have a civil war in Iraq now, because of that. Okay, so that's the same thing that we're doing here, right? Now let's talk about the money. This is the big thing. Denaries. Okay, denaries came out; they were pure silver. Within 20 years, they were 50% silver. Okay, after 80 years, they were 5% silver. Okay, after 200 years of the empire's rule, this is a key point. The government rejected denaries as payment for taxes. They rejected their own money as payment for taxes. Now remember when I was talking about cashless society? And one of the things that I said was eventually the United States government will not take its own money to pay for things. You will not be able to use this right here to pay your taxes, to buy food, to do anything with. You will have to use a credit card. MasterCard, Visa, and American Express will be the only thing that is accepted for payment. Same thing happened in Rome. They debased the currency. They debased the currency. They debased the currency. They debased the currency to the point where the rich, women, senators, and stuff like that would only accept payment in gold. You couldn't give them denaries anymore. In silver, they wouldn't accept it. And the poor people down at the bottom in the slums and the favelas, the bottom part of Elysium, okay, were forced to use the denaries. Now what happens? I'm going to go through a real quick cycle, and this happens every single time. You can write this down. Corrupt currency leads to inflation. Inflation leads to price controls. The government comes down, forces milk to be $1 a gallon to make sure everybody's alive. Okay? Price controls always, 100,000% of the time, lead to black market. Okay? This milk costs me $3 to make. I'm not going to sell it at the store. I'm going to sell it under the table in a black market so that I can make a profit for $4 a gallon. Leads to black market. Black market, 100% million times lead to fascism controls. Oh, you're going to have a black market? Okay, we're going to send the police to the market and we're going to take your milk away from you altogether. That happens every single time. That is the same cycle every single time. Corrupt currency leads to inflation. And a corrupt currency is a currency where it's debased. Okay? This right here. Do you know in 1900 you could buy a loaf of bread for 2 pennies? A loaf of bread now, 100 years later, costs $2. That is the debasement of currency. That is inflation. Okay? Corrupt currency leads to inflation. Inflation leads to price controls. Price controls leads to black market. Black market leads to fascist controls. Okay? That is how the country is brought down. That is how empires end. That is how revolutions, revolts, and wars occur because of this right here. Okay? Now, I want you to think about something. When you think about Rome, you think about the barbarians at the gate. Everybody thinks about barbarians and savages and the Germanic tribes. I'm going to say 2 other words to you, and I want you to really think about how we use them in today's society. Freedom fighter and terrorist. Now, is a barbarian a freedom fighter? Yeah. He has his own country already, and Rome is trying to take over. Okay? Is a barbarian a terrorist? Yeah. He is fighting against the power that be to create a better world for himself. And I've said this before on all of these channels. Eventually, you and me and my neighbors are going to have to decide, are we freedom fighters? Are we going to be classified as terrorists? Are we going to be the barbarians and savages that change the planet or not? So think about it. Think about it. It just matters what side of history you're on. But our founding fathers, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, were terrorists. They were freedom fighters. They were barbarians. They were savages against the rule of King George. Okay? Who classified them as that? King George did, because he was the power that be at that time. Okay? You look at Aleppo right now. They just lost the war. The rebels just lost the war a couple days ago. Assad's regime stayed in. That is the same as King George defeating George Washington, sailing across the Delaware and losing, and King George stays in charge of the United States, and the United States stays an English colony. That's exactly the same thing as what happened in Syria right now. The rebels didn't win. George Washington didn't win in Syria this time. Aleppo is a shambles. There's nothing left there. There's no buildings left there. There's no infrastructure left there. It's just rubble. Okay? So the entire country that Assad now owns is rubble. But that's something to think about. Okay? What is the mentality behind all of this, and why did all of this happen? And it's more that women in ancient Roman times and in our current times are more interested in objectifying themselves socially, being on Facebook, getting famous, social interaction, than having their children raised. You know, in ancient Rome, the rich, the children were raised by servants. They embraced the luxury that was brought to them by all the slaves and everything like that. And, you know, by the end of the Roman Empire, I already said there at the peak of the Roman Empire, there was 1 million people. At the end of the Roman Empire, there were 50,000 people living in Rome because everyone had fled. And there was no population growth. The women did not take care of their children. They didn't have children. The Mgtow movement was very, very strong in ancient Rome because there was no reason. You either went off to war, and if you were married and had kids, you went off to war and got yourself killed, or you ended up as a slave paying taxes to the emperor, right? And women took the property back then. If your husband died in war, the women took the property, right? All right. Here's the big thing, and this is it right here too. And remember, I'm a military guy. I'm retired out of the military, so this really affects me. 444 AD was the date that the state's revenue was not enough to pay the military requirement. You had more and more and more of these mercenaries coming in. The empire became so big, and every square mile that the empire becomes bigger, that's another fortress that you need to build. That's another 100 men that you need to put into the military. The military became so big and bloated and gigantic that it overtook 100% of the revenue of the state. That is what really did it. When the police state gets so freaking big that the mercenaries can't be paid anymore, this is your key. Watch for this. When the police are no longer getting paid by the state anymore, guess what? They're no longer loyal to the state anymore. They just become regular citizens like you and me. And that's the thing to look for. When the revolution starts, half of the police department, half of the guys, the people that are running the police state, half of the military, half of the Navy won't be getting paid. And they'll be looking at you and me and they'll be saying, fuck it, we're not getting paid anyways. Let's join the rebels. And they'll hop over to the rebels. And that's how you get an entire army. That's how you start getting tanks. That's how you start getting M16s. That's how you start taking over the government. When the government gets too big to pay the military to keep it safe. And a lot of, I think it's 28 of the last Caesars didn't die by natural causes. They all died by the military. Their generals and stuff killed them. And why did they usually kill them? Because they didn't pay the generals. They didn't have the money to pay the generals. So they went into their bed at night, stabbed them, killed them, got a new Caesar in. The new Caesar paid them for 6 months or a year or whatever, till he realized he was out of money. They killed that one. Okay? But we talk about the people in the city, but the final thing is when that police state flops over onto our side, onto the rebel side, because they're not getting paid. This right here is the key to bringing down the empire. Money and lack of money. Okay? What happens to the rich that move out to the country. Okay, what are they doing out there? They're out there to avoid taxes because living in Rome, it was easy for them to find you, right? This is the same right now as the Mgtow movement. Okay, the people moving to rural areas. You have millions of young men that are out of the labor force. Okay, they graduate from college, they move back home. They're 26 years old, they've never had a job. Okay, Gamergate. You know, they play video games all day. I'm retired, but I play video games probably 2 or 3 hours a day, every day. Don't work. Don't get married. Don't have kids. Rome goes from 1 million people to 50,000 people because you don't have kids. Because the men see no advantage to getting married in this gynocentric world where all you can be is a slave and pay taxes. Okay? The birth rate goes down. You have 20, 30, 40 years of a zombie economy. And young men who have become disposable, they completely withdraw from society. They build their own life rafts. They get their own cabins. They get their shit paid for, and they live by themselves, and they don't fuck around with society because society is only there to take from them. Society provides them no benefit whatsoever if they have everything taken care of themselves. Okay? And then what eventually happened in Rome and what's going to happen here is people are going to renounce citizenship. Jesse Ventura renounced his citizenship and moved to Mexico. Okay? That's it. Or they decide when you do buy in, they became a slave. Some people that own plantations sold the plantations off to other rich Romans just to become a slave for their new owner on their farm that they used to own. Okay, that's like becoming a renter in your own house that you used to own because some rich guy came in and bought the house out from underneath you. And the entire reason that they did it is to get away from taxes because the tax structure was so freaking high and slaves don't pay taxes. So the guy said, oh, I'm just going to become a slave. I can't afford to pay this $1 million of taxes. Same as now. Become a wage slave. I can't afford the taxes. I'm going to go to work for Walmart. And I'm going to work the rest of my life for minimum wage and be a wage slave. Right? Same exact thing, guys. All right? So that's revolution. That's what's going to happen. After the police state, how's the police state going to fall? The police state's going to fall because they won't be able to pay for it anymore. And half of those guys that aren't getting paid, they're not going to be loyal anymore. They're going to flip-flop over, and they're going to join the revolution. Here's my revolution page. There it is. Right here. And that's how you're going to get revolt, revolution, world war, and world crisis. They're going to flip-flop over. All right? That's all I got for today. Next, right here, is the next 100 years after the revolt and the revolution or world war or world crisis, you're going to have generational aggression. Remember over here when we had generational pacification, where we trained men to be passive? Well, what do you think's going to happen here? I don't know. Find out. That's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it. Put your comments down in the bottom. Tommy Turkey wants to say hi to everybody. Hi! Haven't had him out in a little while. I had the dollar bills out today, so. I hope you enjoyed the video. And it'll be about a week till I make the next one. And as always, take it easy.